Sagittarius, Nostradamus warned you. Everything is about to change and you must not speak of it. Dear Sagittarius, if your spirit has been restless lately, if something in the air feels different, heavier, or maybe strangely light, then trust that this message has found you for a reason. What you're about to hear is not a prediction. It's a quiet confirmation of something your soul has always known but never fully spoken out loud. Nostradamus, the ancient seer, once wrote in veiled language meant not for the masses, but for the wanderers of destiny, for spirits like yours. He did not offer dates for fear. He offered timelines for awakening. This message is not about panic. It is about purpose. A spiritual threshold is drawing near, and it will not wait for the world to notice. It is waiting for you. This is your invitation to pause, to listen, and to feel deeply. There's a secret hidden at the end of this journey, but not everyone will understand it. And perhaps that's the point, because this truth isn't meant to be shouted. It's meant to be lived. So before we begin, if you feel the stirrings of something ancient moving inside your chest, if you feel seen already, go ahead and gently like this video, subscribe to the Zodiac Wisdom channel, and share it with a soul you trust. These small acts of resonance are not just support for this channel. They are echoes into the universe, saying, I'm ready. Now Sagittarius, let us begin. Something once buried is rising, and it has your name written on it. Date 1. The door was never locked, you were just told not to push. Sagittarius, you were never meant to live in confinement. And yet, somewhere along the winding path of your journey, you found yourself walking into a room that slowly dimmed your light. At first, it seemed like a necessary pause, a quiet moment of introspection, a place to gather your thoughts. You, the seeker of meaning, the philosopher of the zodiac, convinced yourself that solitude was a sacred space, that the silence was there to guide you. But over time, that silence turned heavy. You told yourself you were resting, recalibrating, preparing, and yet days passed into months and months bled into years, and something inside you stopped moving. You, who were born to chase horizons, began to shrink to fit within someone else's version of peace. You traded your thunderous laugh for polite smiles. You dimmed your fire so others would feel warm. You bent yourself in impossible ways to avoid making anyone uncomfortable, and called it maturity. But beneath that mask of calm, your spirit, a wild, untamed stallion, began pacing in circles. You started to forget that your light is not reckless. It is righteous. And the door that once seemed so welcoming now looked more like a cage. But here is what they never told you. The door was never locked. You were simply taught to fear the sound it would make when it opened. The prophecy of Nostradamus is not about external catastrophe. For you, Sagittarius, it is about an inner combustion, the breaking point where silence becomes a scream, where I'm fine shatters under the weight of everything you've swallowed. This isn't about June or dates or predictions. It is about that sacred moment when the soul decides enough is enough. You have held your breath for too long, trying to make sure everyone else could breathe easier. You've shouldered responsibilities that were never yours, endured criticism from people who could never understand the vastness of your heart. And the most painful part? You did it with a smile. You rationalized their cruelty. You spiritualized their absence. You turned every betrayal into a lesson and told yourself that the higher path was always to forgive. And maybe that's true, Sagittarius. But forgiveness was never meant to mean self-erasure. There's a sound that echoes in your bones when a karmic cycle begins to break. It is not loud, but it is unmistakable. It sounds like your own voice, clear, certain, unafraid. After years of being buried under expectations, maybe it arrives in a moment of quiet, when you are doing nothing at all, and a sudden wave of grief rises uninvited. Or maybe it visits in dreams, where doors appear in walls that once seemed solid. In spiritual teachings, we are told that the soul knows when its time has come, not to die but to transform. And Sagittarius, your time has come. It is easy to pretend that change arrives with trumpets and fanfare. But the most sacred changes come quietly. They unfold like dawn, soft, persistent, and undeniable. That's what's happening now. You're not breaking down, you're breaking open. You're starting to feel again, not just the pain but the longing, the curiosity, the holy hunger to reclaim what you lost when you began hiding parts of yourself. And let us be honest, Sagittarius, you've hidden far more than anyone realizes. Your vulnerability, your gentleness, The part of you that aches to be understood, not just admired. People often mistake your boldness for immunity. They think because you move quickly and speak with conviction that you must not bleed. But you bleed, Sagittarius. You just learned long ago that some wounds are safer kept under armor. And yet now the armor is cracking. And underneath it, the truth of who you are is glowing with a light that no longer wishes to be contained. You may wonder why it took so long. Why you stayed in situations that no longer fit with people who never truly saw you. But the truth is not that you were weak. The truth is that you loved. Deeply. You believed. Fiercely. You tried. Again and again, not because you lacked dignity, but because you believed in the sacred potential of growth, of redemption, of second chances. And that belief is not something to be ashamed of, it is something holy. But even the most fertile soil must stop offering itself to roots that do not want to grow. Even the most generous spirit must learn to say, I choose me. There's a moment in every Sagittarius's life where the road forks. Not in the external world, but within the soul. One path says, stay here. Stay safe. Stay silent. The other says, risk everything to become real. You are standing at that threshold now. And the prophecy Nostradamus saw was not one written in flames. It was written in choice. Your choice. Will you keep dimming your fire to be more digestible? Or will you let yourself burn in the name of truth? Even if it means walking away from everything that once made you feel secure? You've always known you were different. Not better. Not above. Just wired differently. You see connections others miss. You ask questions that make people uncomfortable. You feel deeply, speak honestly, and when your light is not being suppressed, you inspire like no other. But for too long you have been apologizing for that light. You've played small in conversations to avoid seeming arrogant. You've watered down your insights so others wouldn't feel intimidated. You've hidden your dreams because somewhere along the way, someone laughed when you dared to speak them. And yet still the dreams remain. The fire persists. And the time is now. Not to prove anything. Not to convince anyone. But to reclaim the parts of you that were never wrong to begin with. Think back, Sagittarius. Can you remember the first time you made yourself smaller so someone else could stay? The first time you said, it's okay, when it wasn't? The first time you told yourself, they didn't mean it even though they did? Those moments matter. Not because they define you, but because they shaped how you learned to survive. And now, survival is no longer the goal. Now it is time to live. Fully. Bravely. Loudly if need be. And with deep reverence for every version of yourself that got you here. You may still hear the voices of doubt, the ones that whisper, who do you think you are? But here's the truth, Sagittarius. You are the storm and the sunrise. You are the question and the answer. You are the exile and the return. You don't need to defend your light. You only need to remember it. And walk in it, even if no one applauds. Especially then. In spiritual tradition, the concept of divine timing teaches that nothing arrives before it should. Not healing, not clarity, not release. And this moment you are entering, it could not have come 1 second sooner. You were not ready before. You were still clinging to illusions about others, about yourself, about what love should look like. But illusions dissolve when truth becomes more valuable than comfort. And that is what is happening now. You are choosing truth. You are choosing freedom. And yes, it may be painful, but it is sacred. You are not being asked to burn bridges, Sagittarius. You are being invited to build new ones, between your soul and your purpose, between your past and your future, between the person you've been and the one you are now becoming. And some people will not walk with you across that bridge. That's okay. Not everyone is meant to understand your evolution. Some were only meant to be chapters. But you are the author. And the next page is waiting. So if your hands are trembling, if your heart is racing, if tears are falling without explanation, let them. That is not weakness. That is awakening. That is your soul cracking open to let the light flood in. You are not being broken. You are being made whole. And when the light finally touches every part of you, the parts you love and the parts you hide, you will not need anyone's permission to shine. You will simply rise. Because Sagittarius, this was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering who you've always been. And finally letting them see it. Gate 2. The end that frees you was never a punishment, it was a promise fulfilled. There is a silence that follows loss. Not the loud kind of loss that others see and grieve with you, the breakup, the funeral, the farewell. No, Sagittarius, I'm talking about the quieter kind. The one that no one else notices. The kind you carry alone because it didn't have a ceremony. Because it wasn't dramatic enough to be mourned. The kind of ending that creeps in slowly, like a light dimming in a room you once called home. And one day, you just realize the warmth is gone. But you keep sitting there hoping it might return. Hoping the walls will remember the sound of laughter. That the air will fill again with presence, with life. You don't speak of it. You don't explain. You just stay. Because something in you, some old wound perhaps, told you that leaving would make you the ungrateful one. The one who gave up too soon, the one who couldn't endure. But Sagittarius, endurance is not always wisdom. Sometimes it's just fear wearing a brave face. You've always been able to bear more than most. Your spirit was carved by fire, trained by storms, blessed with the kind of resilience others admire from a distance. But just because you can carry the weight doesn't mean you should. And just because you stayed doesn't mean it was right. That's the pain no one talks about. The ache of realizing that the ending you feared was actually your liberation. That walking away was never betrayal, it was self-respect. That the one you waited for was never going to return as the version you needed them to be. And perhaps even harder, that the version of you who once needed them is no longer here. You grew. Quietly. Alone. Without applause. And it's time to honor that growth. The prophecy Nostradamus saw was not just about collapse. It was about closure. A sacred ending to a karmic loop that has circled through your life for too long. A loop where you kept playing the same role. The one who waits, the one who forgives, the one who gives even when the cup is empty. And what a beautiful heart you have, Sagittarius. Truly. But that heart deserves to beat for something greater than chasing unreciprocated love. You've romanticized endurance, but endurance without joy is not love. It is a slow erosion of the self. You deserve better. And you've known that for a while now. You just didn't know how to say it out loud. There's a reason you were drawn to this message. There's a reason your heart beat a little louder when you read the title, even if you didn't understand why. Because your soul remembers. Your soul remembers a promise made before this lifetime. A vow to stop repeating cycles that shrink you. And Sagittarius, you are on the verge of keeping that promise. Not with fanfare. Not with vengeance. But with a quiet goodbye whispered from the deepest part of your being. This is the ending that sets you free. Think of the person or situation that's clung to your energy like a shadow. Someone you gave everything to. Maybe even someone you loved more than you've ever loved yourself. Maybe it was a relationship, a friendship, a dream that once felt sacred. You invested your time, your faith, your vulnerability. You wrote chapters with them in ink, never imagining you'd have to erase the ending. But here you are, standing at the edge of something that no longer fits you. The shoes are too tight. The room is too small. And the future you're stepping into cannot hold what your past was built around. So what do? You let go. Not as a punishment to them. Not as a denial of what was. But as a devotion to who you are now. In Buddhist teachings there is a sacred lesson. Nothing is lost. Everything that leaves creates space for something more aligned to enter. But that space must be cleared with intention. With courage. With a trembling hand that still chooses to release. And that's what you're being called to do, Sagittarius. Not to forget, but to reframe. Not to erase, but to evolve. You are not discarding love. You are redefining it. Because love that requires you to abandon yourself is not love. It is a lesson. And you've already learned it. Do you remember the nights you stayed awake, wondering if they would come back? The mornings you checked your phone, hoping for a message that never arrived? The holidays where their absence was louder than the music playing in the background? You created altars in your heart for people who never even lit a candle for you. And still you stayed. Still you hoped. That is not weakness, Sagittarius. That is devotion. But devotion, when misplaced, becomes a prison. And you are too wild, too cosmic, too royal to live in a prison of what-ifs. You've walked with ghosts long enough. And the strange thing is, letting go does not mean you stop loving. It means you start loving differently, more wisely, more honestly, with boundaries, with discernment, with the kind of grace that says, I bless what we had, but I no longer belong to it. You are not bitter. You are becoming better. And in that becoming, there will be a grief that feels like betrayal. Because part of you believed that staying meant loyalty. But the truth? Staying in pain is not loyalty. It's self-betrayal. And you, my dear Sagittarius, have betrayed yourself for the last time. The soul that waits is noble. But the soul that walks away when the waiting becomes a wound, that is sacred. Nostradamus didn't see your suffering as a punishment. He saw it as a signal, a divine alarm clock ringing inside your bones. A moment written into the stars where Sagittarius would stop spinning the same wheel and finally step off. Not out of anger, not out of defeat, but out of clarity. Because the door that's closing behind you now is not slamming. It is being gently sealed, so that the drafts of yesterday no longer chill your future. And what lies ahead? That is the most beautiful part. It's not a replacement. It's not someone better. It's you, the version of you who wakes up without the ache, who no longer contorts to be chosen, who no longer apologizes for needing to be met halfway, the version of you who sits alone but never feels lonely, who laughs without looking around for approval, who no longer performs strength but lives it, breathes it, owns it. You are entering a season of reclamation. Everything you gave away, your time, your energy, your compassion, your softness, it is all coming back to you. Not as revenge, as restoration. You don't need to win to feel worthy. You already are. Your worth is not determined by who stays or who sees it. It is determined by the fact that you were born, and that you are still here, and that despite everything you still love. You still believe. You still rise. So as you step into this new chapter, I ask you, what are you still carrying that was never yours to hold? Whose opinion still lives rent-free in your mind? What outdated story are you still telling yourself about what you deserve? Write it down. Burn it. Bury it. Release it. Not to prove anything, but to honor the sacred closing that is now unfolding. You don't have to scream it. You don't have to post about it. Just live it. Quietly. Powerfully. Authentically. And the universe will respond. Not with noise, but with alignment. With synchronicity. With doors that open without you even knocking. Because Sagittarius, when you stop chasing what isn't yours, what is meant for you starts to find its way home. The ending is here, but it is not your undoing. It is your unbinding. So go. Not as someone who is leaving, but as someone who has finally returned to themselves, to their truth, to the fire that never went out. You are not walking away. You are walking home. And that changes everything. Date 3. Love that doesn't leave. The soul connection you've been searching for. There is a kind of love that doesn't arrive with fireworks or fairy tales. It doesn't crash into your life like a storm, nor does it beg to be noticed. It doesn't ask you to prove yourself or to shrink to be acceptable. Instead, it appears like a soft whisper from within, an ancient memory that never needed words to be remembered. And Sagittarius, you were made for this kind of love. Not the kind that demands your energy, but the kind that matches your spirit. Not the kind that keeps you waiting, but the kind that walks beside you, even in silence. You've searched for this your whole life, haven't you? Even if you couldn't name it. You've felt it in the empty spaces between relationships that looked good on paper but felt hollow in your soul. You felt it when you stood in a crowded room and still sensed something missing. You've longed for a connection that wasn't transactional, performative, or conditional. You didn't need perfection. You just needed truth. And for a long time you wondered if you were asking too much. If maybe your standards were too high, your vision too idealistic. But what if, dear Sagittarius, it was never that you were expecting too much? What if you were just born remembering a different kind of love? One that's been following you across lifetimes. One that doesn't need to be found because it's already inside of you. In the ancient texts of many mystical traditions, it is said that each soul is created with a resonance, a frequency that belongs only to them. And somewhere in this vast universe exists another soul whose resonance harmonizes with yours. Not to complete you, but to awaken you. And when these two meet, even for a brief moment, something timeless is activated. Not infatuation, not obsession, but recognition. The kind of recognition that says, there you are. I've known you before the beginning. I'll know you beyond the end. Sagittarius, you may have already met someone like this. Or perhaps you haven't met them yet in this lifetime, but your soul remembers. You feel their presence not as a fantasy but as a calling. And that calling is not just to find them, it's to become ready for them. Because sacred love does not show up when we are distracted by illusions. It shows up when we are clear, when we are whole, when we are no longer trying to be chosen, but are choosing ourselves completely. And here's the paradox. When you no longer need that kind of love to feel complete, it arrives. But this isn't just about romantic love. The soul connection you're being drawn to might come in the form of a friend, a teacher, a stranger whose eyes carry a familiar ache. It might come as a place that feels like home without reason, or as a moment of profound solitude where you realize that the love you've been seeking was never outside of you. It was waiting for you to return to yourself. And it's in these moments, Sagittarius, that you begin to feel the truth of spiritual love. It is not given. It is remembered. There's a story I once heard about a woman who spent her life chasing love that always seemed just out of reach. Every time she thought she had found it, it slipped away, through betrayal, through misunderstanding, through the simple erosion of time. She began to believe that love was something rare, something scarce, something she had to earn. Until one day, while meditating in a quiet field, she heard a voice, not from the sky but from within. It said, "You are not unloved. You are just not listening to the love that never left." And in that instant she felt it, not as a memory but as a presence. A warmth that didn't ask her to change, didn't ask her to prove. It just was. She wept not because she was sad, but because she realized that for all those years, she had been looking in the wrong direction. Sagittarius, what if you too have been looking outward for something that can only be remembered inward? What if the soul connection that's destined for you cannot arrive until you meet yourself? Fully, fiercely, gently? What if your next great love story begins not with another person, but with the version of you who no longer compromises for love, who no longer fears being too much, who no longer silences her truth to keep someone else comfortable? You have been given the gift of cosmic memory. You see patterns before others do. You feel shifts before they manifest. You know when something is real and when something is wrong, even if you pretend not to. And that knowing is not a burden. It is your birthright. That deep intuition is what will lead you to the connection that doesn't just excite your mind or body, but nourishes your spirit. A connection where you are not asked to perform, to shrink, to edit yourself. A love that says, "I see all of you, and I choose all of you." But you must be willing to walk away from anything that mimics this love without embodying it. You must stop convincing yourself that crumbs are enough, that near misses are fate, that chemistry is destiny. True soul love is not chaotic. It is not conditional. It doesn't come and go with the seasons. It grounds you, clarifies you, it heals what others only triggered. And yes, it challenges you, but never to become someone else, only to become more of who you truly are. Think of the people who have entered your life and stirred something in you. Some awakened your fire. Some awakened your fears. Some awakened your wounds. And maybe, just maybe, one awakened your soul. But even if that connection did not last, it was not a failure. It was a preparation. Every heartbreak was a redirection. Every goodbye was a sacred clearing. Every silence was a space being created for something more aligned, more whole, more eternal. The love that is meant for you does not chase. It remembers. And it doesn't ask for your performance. It asks for your presence. So stop waiting for someone to come in and rescue you from your own loneliness. Your loneliness is not an enemy. It is an invitation. An invitation to sit with yourself long enough to remember the resonance of your own soul. Because only when you know your own vibration can you recognize the one who truly matches it. And when that moment comes, and it will come, you will not doubt it. It won't be loud. It won't be forced. It will feel like a breath you've been holding finally exhaling. Like a door opening not in front of you but within you. And that love, dear Sagittarius, will not be the end of your journey. It will be the reflection of everything you've become along the way. So if you are still holding on to a love that asked you to shrink, if you are still grieving a connection that ghosted you in your hour of need, if you are still wondering whether you will ever feel truly seen, release it. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer matches the frequency of who you are becoming. You don't have to hate it. You don't have to forget it. Just bless it and walk forward, because there is a love waiting for you. Not in the next relationship, but in the next level of awareness. A love that says, "I do not come to fill your emptiness. I come to mirror your wholeness." I do not need you to be anything else but the wild, wise, beautiful soul you already are. And that love, Sagittarius, it doesn't leave. It lives. Within you. Around you. Through you. Always. Gate 4. The sacred return. You're no longer waiting, you're awakening. There comes a moment in every awakened soul's life when the silence becomes more meaningful than any answer. When the longing to be understood dissolves into the joy of simply understanding yourself. Sagittarius, you've spent so much of your life seeking meaning, love, justice, peace. You asked the stars for direction, looked into the eyes of strangers hoping they'd remember you, wrote secret prayers into your pillow hoping something out there was listening. But what if the thing you've been searching for isn't out there anymore? What if the search is done? What if the seeker has now become the sanctuary? You have always been on a pilgrimage, haven't you? Even when standing still. Even when rooted in a place, your spirit wandered, looking for the feeling of home, of peace, of being known beyond your name and your past. And yet home was never a destination. It was a frequency, a quietness beneath the noise, a light that never stopped glowing, even when you forgot how to see it. And now, Sagittarius, the light is returning. Not as something new, but as something ancient within you waking up. Not as a fire that demands to be seen, but as an ember that's always been burning, quietly waiting for you to sit beside it once more. There's a reason you felt disconnected lately. Why the things that once brought joy now feel dull. Why the people you once clung to seem distant, even if they're still near. It's not that you're broken. It's that you're shedding. The skin of who you had to be is peeling away. The stories you told yourself to survive are no longer believable. The masks you wore out of politeness have begun to itch. And though part of you fears what life will look like without all these layers, another part of you is whispering, finally, this is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough. And unlike the transformations you've had before, where you had to crawl through pain, fight through resistance, beg the universe for clarity, this one is different. This one arrives in stillness. In the slow mornings when your breath feels softer. In the quiet moments when you suddenly realize you're not anxious, not searching, not craving. You're just being. And it feels enough. That's the awakening, Sagittarius. It doesn't always come with visions and revelations. Sometimes it comes with peace, with space, with a single tear falling. Not from sorrow, but from the grace of finally letting go. You are no longer trying to earn your worth. You are no longer waiting for someone else to give you permission to bloom. You are simply turning inward and realizing you were never waiting for the world to see you. You were waiting to see yourself. In Zen teachings, there is a phrase that says, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. The outer life does not always change immediately, but your experience of it does. Suddenly, the mundane becomes sacred. The silence becomes a symphony. The ordinary becomes divine. And you begin to realize that what makes life meaningful is not what you gain, but what you notice, what you remember, what you allow. And what you are being asked to allow now is something you've spent lifetimes resisting, receiving, not chasing, not fixing, not proving, just receiving. There's a sacred energy making its way toward you, Sagittarius. It does not knock loudly. It does not rush. It waits for readiness. And you, whether you believe it yet or not, are ready. Ready to be loved without explanation. Ready to be chosen without conditions. Ready to be seen, not for your potential but for your essence. And most importantly, ready to receive without guilt. This may feel unfamiliar. You've been conditioned to give, to help, to uplift, to be the fire others gather around. And yes, that's a beautiful gift. But even fires need tending. Even stars need to rest. You are not here just to guide others, you are here to live, to dance, to laugh until your ribs ache, to taste the sweetness of a life not earned through suffering, but welcomed through surrender. And yet, surrender is not passive. It is the most active thing a soul can do. It is the moment you decide, I trust. Not because everything makes sense, but because I've survived enough to know I don't need to control it all. Because I've cried enough to know that tears do not mean I'm weak. Because I've lost enough to know that some things return, not when I chase them, but when I'm finally still enough to receive. There is a return coming for you, Sagittarius. Not necessarily of a person or a place, but of a feeling, a truth, A promise you made to yourself long ago. The promise that you would never again abandon your intuition. That you would no longer betray your own soul just to keep the peace. That you would stop shrinking in rooms where your presence was always meant to be the brightest thing there. You kept that promise even when it hurt. Even when it meant walking alone. And now the universe is whispering back. I saw you. I never left. And I am bringing you back what you were never meant to lose, your joy. Your voice. Your inner sanctuary. You may notice small signs. Synchronicities, dreams, quiet waves of comfort in the middle of an ordinary day. A song playing just when you needed it. A stranger's words echoing something you felt last night. A forgotten memory surfacing no longer as pain but as proof of how far you've come. These are not coincidences. They are confirmations. And in that confirmation a choice arises. Do you keep reaching into the past hoping it will apologize? Or do you turn toward the horizon and let the future surprise you? Do you keep editing your truth to keep others comfortable? Or do you finally write the story that only you were born to write? Do you keep whispering your needs? Or do you speak them like prayers and trust that what's meant for you will echo back? You are not lost, Sagittarius. You are returning, not to who you were, but to who you were always meant to be, before the world told you to be smaller, softer, easier to carry. This is the moment your inner fire stops flickering and begins to rise. Not wildly but steadily. Like the dawn. Like a homecoming. And though not everyone will understand your glow, though some will still ask you to turn it down, you will no longer feel the need to explain. Because the ones who are meant for this new season will recognize your light as something familiar. Something they've been waiting for too. You've crossed the gates of pain, loss, and love. And now you stand in the gate of sacred silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of arrival. The kind where nothing needs to be said because everything is finally understood. So close your eyes, Sagittarius. Breathe. Feel your feet on the ground, your chest rising, your soul exhaling. You're not chasing anything. You're not running from anyone. You are simply here. And that is enough. Conclusion. This is not the end. It's the first breath of your becoming. Sagittarius, if you've made it here, something inside you has shifted. Maybe it's subtle. A loosening in the chest. A tear you didn't expect. A moment of stillness where you felt more like yourself than you have in a long time. That's not coincidence. That's alignment. The gates you've walked through were not just words, they were mirrors. And in each one, a different part of you returned. The pain you endured was never a punishment. It was an invitation to evolve. The endings that broke your heart were sacred closures designed to set you free. The soul connections that stirred you weren't always meant to stay, but they were meant to awaken you. And now in this final chapter, you are no longer the one who waits, who questions, who doubts her place in the universe. You are the one who remembers, the one who rises, the one who receives. So let this be your decree. I, Sagittarius, honor every path that led me here. I release what no longer resonates and I rise, not in resistance but in radiance. I choose to be seen. I choose to receive. I choose to live in the light of who I truly am. And now I invite you to claim this new beginning. In the comments write, I have returned to myself, and I am ready to receive the life meant for me. Not for me, not for others, but for you, as your ritual of reclamation. If this journey touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the Zodiac Wisdom channel, and share it with a fellow seeker. These small gestures ripple out into the universe and help this soul tribe grow stronger together. And always remember, what's meant for you doesn't need chasing. It only needs your presence. This is not goodbye, dear Sagittarius. This is the beginning of everything.